Okay, my friends, this is going to be part 2. If you haven't come up here and watched part 1 yet, it's called the same name, Monsters in the Bible and Older Ancient Texts. But this is part 1. I'd recommend you go and listen to this and watch it, because it describes the most ancient accounts. And I probably go over a lot of it again, but it can't hurt to go through that. Okay, again, this is Paul Wallace and the fifth kind, and he's going to be going over stunning information they can finally begin to understand about these ancient texts and so forth. Now, I'm doing this under the Fair Use Act, and I'd love to interact with Paul Wallace and Mauro Biglino, because they're doing a real deep dive. Everybody else, I got to be honest with you, you really have to do some research, and I believe these guys are researchers. Now, I don't know that for 100%, because I really haven't dug deep into their work, but I'm seeing what interests me. So let's watch together and see what we can make of it. And this is, again, the fifth kind. They got 774,000 subscribers. He's very, very entertaining to watch. I've watched Paul Wallace a number of times, but I never really got deep into this new information that they're talking about that we can finally understand. What that is, I don't know. So let's find out together. There's all kinds of things. Bible secrets revealed, the forbidden scriptures lost, this and that. Well, again, I'm a material guy. I show material evidence. I think that outweighs some of these hidden and lost scriptures. I mean, I believe that they're true, the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's a lot of other Bibles that are, Ethiopia has their own sort of Bible, but they all fall pretty close. Now, the things that I found support the Greek myths. Now we're going to see how they weave together. All right, once again, this is Paul Wallace. I'm just going to let it play for a minute so he can introduce himself. Here goes.
Fifth kind. I've been a preacher for more than 30 years. I've studied and taught through the book of Genesis many, many times in churches all around the world, and I've trained pastors in the skills of interpreting text. You translate Elohim in the plural, it all makes sense that what we actually have is a conflict among the sky people, among the powerful ones, over how intelligent the human species is to be. We've read stories of brutal colonization and ill treatment of human beings as a story of God and God's behavior. We've come up with a picture of God that is completely distorted. The Apostle Paul described God as the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. You go to the mistranslation of the Elohim stories and you've got a God who's brutal, violent, can genocide people, will slaughter people who are actually trying to serve him. It's a monstrous deity we've created by mistranslation, and you can draw a straight line from that to all kinds of violence and abuses that we've justified in the name of God. And that comes down to mistranslation. When I talk about Bible translation, people might say, well, that's a bit of a rarefied topic, isn't it? But the implications of getting it wrong are enormous, and they have been through the ages. As I've studied theology and world mythology, I've realized that dragons occurred in ancestral narratives all around the world. You go to Egypt, and their dragon was Akek. And then in Mesoamerica, you've got Quetzalcoatl, Cucumats, Kukulkan. In Georgia, you've got the Colchis. In Portugal and Spain, you've got the Coca. You've got the Cuchedra, the Ikuchi, the Curachu. The shape of the stories is very similar from culture to culture. And they talk about a time when our ancestors were ruled over by entities that were not human. They are reptilian.
All right, this is going to be interesting. This, my friends, is going to be fabulous. Let's just let it play. And again, I'm not trying to steal anything. I want to comment on this. So far, I'm 100%. Now, does Paul Wallace go back to the times that I'm talking about, Gaia and how the Earth was created? I don't know. This is what we want to find out. Here we go.
They destroyed people using fire, and they used the humans as their workforce to supply them with...
Author and researcher Paul Wallace probes the world's ancient mythologies for clues about the origins of the human race, and has published several books in the field of mysticism and spirituality. In the last decade, his work has probed the world's ancient mythologies for the insights they hold on our origins as a species and our potential as human beings. Paul's work in church ministry has included training pastors in the interpretation of biblical texts, working as a troubleshooter for communities of faith, and serving as an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia. Endorsed by George Norrie and Eric von Daniken, Paul Wallace's latest book, Echoes of Eden, explores what secrets of human potential were buried with our ancestors' memories of ET contact.
What he's talking about here in his writings this is important. This is passing on literally ancestral knowledge that has been suppressed. Simple as that. It's ancestral knowledge that in the age of enlightenment has been suppressed. And if you begin to talk about it, they make fun of you, they point fingers, they, call you names. I mean, I've gone through the whole plethora of everything. And now it's starting to become a little more accepted to speak of it. So I'm going to cut through here and there, and when I find something that has something I can point to materially, or I'm sort of torn whether I should just let it go so that we can comment on every little spot. I'd love to talk with Paul, because you get somebody that has this kind of knowledge, that's rare. That is rare. And for him, because he's also prolific. He's not just, I went to all these things, I got all kind of papers about it. No, he wants to talk about it, and I want to talk about it. And my knowledge is rare too. Very, very few people have the material knowledge that I have and the evidence that I have to support what I'm saying. I'm not just talking. I have evidence to support every word I've ever said. You know what, I am just going to let it go through, and if he has any complaints, I'll take it down. But I think it's better to make sure we get all of his information, because he seems to be a well-informed guy. Now, let's go back a second so we don't miss anything. All right, here we go.
Endorsed by George Norrie and Eric von Daniken, Paul Wallace's latest book, Echoes of Eden, explores what secrets of human potential were buried with our ancestors' memories of ET contact. From Senate briefings in Washington, D.C., to secret ceremonies in southern Africa, from strange phenomena in Australia and Iraq, to mysterious encounters in modern Brazil and ancient Greece. Echoes of Eden will take you around the globe to discover why military, intelligence, and other government agencies are so interested in archaeology, indigenous rituals, and traditional initiation practices. What is the connection between higher cognitive powers like remote viewing and precognition and ET contact in the deep past? And what are the implications for us today? Echoes of Eden, out now. Available on Amazon. Follow the links in the description. Go to www.paulanthonywallace.com for information about Paul and his books.
We've had 2,000 years in which the question of ET contact, paleo contact, a populated universe have been completely taboo. In the beginning of Christianity, it was not. There were very significant church fathers who taught what I'm teaching in my Eden series and believed in a populated universe also believed that our development as a species was aided by interventions from ET demographics. They read the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, through that lens. And they had learnt that from Plato, who was writing nearly half a millennium before Christianity. So when Christianity began, it was a kaleidoscope of experiences and ideas and theologies. And
I just want to make one statement and maybe make a note of this. The first writers were Hesiod, basically. He was the one that started it, and he was told to write these things down by the daughters of Zeus, which were the Muses. And he was he was a shepherd, I think it was on Mount Helicon, tending his flock, and these Muses came down and said, here, we want you to write the story of humanity. And he said, I can't write. And they said, sit down, you will write. And he wrote, and he wrote, and wrote, and wrote, and wrote. And he wrote the Theogony, which was how the universe came to be, or at least the solar system. And Ovid, O-V-I-D, wrote the Metamorphosis at a later date, which was close to Christ's time, and incorporated all of the original writings of all of the people, you know, Homer and Plato and all of them. And Hesiod, obviously, Plutarch. I mean, there was a whole crew that were writing things that he incorporated into his work. It was an epic work. So Ovid would be where I would go. And he talks about the entities turned into landscape, into the natural landscape, by means of violence. And he's talking mountains and oceans and planets. And that, I believe, now is true. I know it sounds absolutely unbelievable, but if you follow my work, you're going to see that it is not unbelievable at all.
And it included this narrative of ancient ET contact. Unfortunately, as the Roman Empire hijacked Christianity and morphed it into the Department of Religion, the Imperial Department of Religion, it silenced some of these more interesting narratives, and it narrowed Christianity down to this orthodoxy with God and the emperor at the top, the bishops and the senators in the middle, and then the priests and the people at the bottom, praying and obeying. And some of these more empowering texts that spoke about these more interesting phenomena were excluded from the canon. And it became such a hostile environment for those kinds of views that not only were key church fathers anathematized, excommunicated, their work destroyed so that we have no record of some of the writing of these key people, but some of these key documents were literally buried in the desert to protect them from destruction, so that information about paleocontact, for instance, and higher cognitive powers would survive for a later generation. And
I just heard 63.
Okay, here we go back again.
it is just known. This is a taboo. We don't talk about these things. And I think I was very fortunate that I did the research that led to the Eden series when I was not leading a congregation. If I'd been leading a congregation and doing that research, I don't think I could have published, because it would have split my congregation in two. Half the people would have read the Eden books and said, "Oh, thank you so much for putting this on the table, because I've seen this in the Bible too, or because I've had these close encounter experiences, and finally we can talk about it." But the other half of the congregation would say, "Pastor, this is heresy. You can't stay here." So I was very fortunate not to have those obligations and to have the freedom to follow where the data led.
All right. Another point I want to express is that is exactly where I am. I have no obligation to academia or anyone other than to the truth. I cannot be fired. So, but if you are in, like he would have been fired from his pastor or whatever he was doing there, his church. And the same thing if you're in academia. If you talk about the things I'm talking about, and even though I have the evidence, it's refused to be seen. So now we need to talk about these things, because these are, in my mind, there is an eternity. I'm not going to last forever, and I don't think you will either. And if you don't, what happens? What happens? Does it have any effect on what you believed when you were alive and who you accepted as maybe your savior? Or your Buddha, or your whoever it was that is important to you from your culture? From I go for the ancient ones. What did they say? Now, it gets very, very hard to understand, other than to the fact that, here's where I come down on this. I might as well tell you now. I say there's bazillion gods. And when they built humans, and I know they built them because I have them when they were not even built as they are today. They didn't have tendons, they had springs. Hold on a second. Here it is right here. I've shown these another zillion times. These are notos. Inside there's no tendons, there's springs. And here's one that's all eroded down. There's the ankle bone right there. There's a strap. You can't see it probably. The strap comes right up to the saddle. And the springs are here to load that foot. All my stuff is pretty well certified. So, at any rate, it's time to really take a look at the truth of where we are. And it sounds like he's getting deep into how they populated the planet, how we were a species that worked for these gods. But now, I don't think they were all equal. So I say there was a God Almighty. And I got a feeling that he was so upset at everything, that trying to stop all these monsters and crazy things. And again, I show the monsters and the crazy things. Some of them are still laying around on the earth, just like the ones in North Africa. And I think he was so upset that he just tried to wipe everything back to clean, and he got most of it, but he still got a lot of badness going on. And then he finally said to his son, to me it was Jesus Christ, he said, go down there and straighten these people out. Don't have any violence in your heart. Show them what love and wonderfulness is, to treat each other as they should, with compassion and love and peace, and treat them just like they want to be treated. And as long as they do that, we'll take them back. If they don't, you're going to go back down there with a rod of iron and you're going to clean house. Because that's what it says. He says the next time Jesus comes back, it's going to be with a rod of iron. He came one time and he said, do it the way I'm showing you. Watch what they're going to do to me. They're going to kill me. They're going to tear me to pieces. They're going to make me scream, and horrifying things. But I will endure that to just show, to demonstrate to you that if you react with violence, all you get is more violence. And that's an absolute case, in fact. Now, how do you deal with bullies? How do you deal with these thugs and these groups now that we're having that are intimidating, and anybody that wants to stand up for anything anymore? Not to hurt anybody, just to make statements and to do their job. They're intimidating the hell out of people. That's not right. I can't see God is going to accept them. You know, this is a brief few seconds you're here on earth. I'm telling you right now, trust me. It does not last that long. And, you know, the good times are good and they can be bad too. You know, a lot of it is how you handle things. I mean, it's just so complicated. It needs a lot of discussion. But before we can discuss anything, how did we get here and who is our master? Now, it said that God had 600 angels or whatever to come down here, supposed to take care of and help us and get us going and all that. And 200 of them saw the women look real good and said, let's go down and have some fun. And then they all signed a pact with Satan. Now, were those all dragons? Were those all monsters and giants? And I just don't know anymore. But I can tell you things in space are body parts. I know, Roger's going crazy. I have not gone crazy. They are body parts in space. Just to back me up, you see this up here? That is a comet out there, Oumuamua. And right next to it is the structure of fingers. And that is a finger. And it is out in space, and I'm going to show you another shot of it and explain exactly why I can say it is a finger. All right, if you can see what I'm pointing to right here is the fingertip. This is the grip skin. They call it friction skin. It's really your fingerprint skin. It's peeling off. This is an apical tuft. An apical tuft has all the little balls and holes in it, and all the tendon fibers come down. This right here is another implant. If you go back to where I showed you at the book, you'll see that's where it implants, that's where it implants, that's where it implants. That's the vein, this is the artery. This is an entire fingertip that is right from over the top of the bone ball, which would have been your knuckle right there. That's the entire fingertip. That's in space, Oumuamua. You see this? This is Comet 67P. I followed this very carefully. These are hydrocarbons. This is literally the same thing that cooks up from your gas grill. It's the smoke. All of these were tiny little blood vessels. They're being illuminated just in the right way. The sun's coming down, cooking them. Nothing's given off here because there's no blood in this. This is the tendon enthesis. It's the ball that locks in. And all of these little cups here, they're not crater impacts. Those are structural things that make it lock in, and the tissues grow into these little cups to hold it in. This is why these things are pointing up. There's also blood vessels here. They're pointing out this way. It's not just blowing dust off of there. That is ejecting barbecue gases that don't combust because there's not enough oxygen. When the astronauts go in space and they come back in from their spacewalk, they say, space smells like steak. That is a tendon enthesis, and that's the Achilles tendon, I believe. Or it's at least an anchor that was going to come out to some muscle. Because there's a tendon coming right out of here. I'll show you that. All right, check this out. I showed you how it was giving off all the little tiny blood vessels, because that has to support every bit of tissue that's above that. Look at this one. That's an artery. That's why it's shooting out that big blast. All of these are little tiny ones, but this has to bring all the blood down. There's an artery that runs out right up your leg, and that was where it came in. All right, don't forget, I said this is the enthesis. This locked into some muscle or the foot, the ankle, whatever. And these little pockets are strictly to hold into that tissue so that it can be pulled on by these tendons. Those tendons run up to what would have been up here as muscle. This is also a bundle here that it broke right off here, but you can see that round bundle. Now, these are some more fibers. Sometimes there's a little extra stalk that comes off them to go to a lot of tendons have multiple tendon fibers, but most of them are here. This bundle is here, and you can see these pinchy little ones. I worked with some of the top anatomists in the world. There's no question what this is. And these are the tendon fibers. These little straps, you see these? Those are tendon fibers. They're not there by accident. And the same thing in the body is tendon fibers. Now, you should come up and watch the video about this comet. But Oumuamua this is a composite picture. All right. All of these pictures were taken by the Hubble telescope. And they kept taking a picture as, I believe it was a Hubble telescope, but it was a telescope that was focused on this, as it turned, and shadows would project on here. And as they made the composite, they could see the dark and light spots where there was structure. Like if you see this here, just follow that down. That's a strap. All of these are the little tendon entices where they bolt in. This comes up and there's another apical tuft up here. That's the grip skin. I can tell exactly what this is, no question whatsoever what it is. It is a finger. And it has the other strap come down where it anchors here and comes down and would come right over the knuckle. That's where the knuckle is, right there. And that's your vein and that's your artery. And this would come right over the top of my knuckle. This part here, coming straight up the back of your hand. There's a really heavy tendon. See the tendon there? Right in the middle? That's what that is on the other side. Now, and they say it smells like steak. Here's a spectral analysis from 67P. You see this ferrous oxides? That's blood. You see this hydrocarbons? That is bodily tissues, hydrocarbons. That's what happens when you take bodies and you bury them. They give off methane gases. That's what that is. Sodium, silicon, carbon. That's us. And they know it. They said, yeah, it's just like a human body. See, that's what Comet 67P would look like if it was on top of Raleigh, North Carolina. These things are big. These creatures were, the Greeks said they were fighting in the sky like gigantic creatures, which appears to be they were, and they were pretty violent. This apparently was where the bone came out, and this is the tendon entices. These don't give off any gases. You saw all the little blood vessels given off, and the tendons come up, and then they attach to muscles. Tendons are straps. In my mind, this is exactly what's going on. You saw those little straps, those little tendon straps. It's broken right off here where it's supposed to start attaching to the muscles. And that's the Achilles heel. You see it? This is before it broke. And that's what I believe Comet 67P is. Okay, I told you I'm into the Greek myths, which they talk about Mimas being, it's a moon, and that right there was the stalk that held that ball. All right, there it is right there. They break right off, just like that. And this is all that little wrinkly looking stuff which is all over there. This is exactly what it is. And that's exactly what the Greeks said. Iapetus is the same thing. Iapetus has an equatorial ridge, which some of the tendon balls in the body do. Different anchors in different places have different characteristics. See, there's another one. This is another god, Tetius, and that's its attachment. And then there's Iapetus is that's Mimas again. Hold on. Iapetus is nope. Tetius. I'm gonna have to fix this up here. Iapetus. All right. There's the equatorial ridge on Iapetus. There's certain tendons that are locked in certain ways in different places in the body. And there's Iapetus again. Now you see, it has two of these emplacements and that ridge. They attach in different ways in different places in the body, but I'm going to tell you what, that is another moon, which is a god, and it is biology in space. All right, so we're back to Paul Wallace here. Now, he's saying that follow where the data led, but the power of the taboo is very strong. It's not just happened within a recent time. Anyway, here he goes talking about how hard it is to bring forth this evidence. Let me just go back a minute.
In doing that research, I don't think I could have published because it would have split my congregation in two. Half the people would have read the Eden books and said, oh, thank you so much for putting this on the table, because I've seen this in the Bible too, or because I've had these close encounter experiences, and finally we can talk about it. But the other half of the congregation would say, Pastor, this is heresy. You can't stay here. So I was very fortunate not to have those obligations and to have the freedom to follow where the data led. But the power of taboo is very strong, and it's not just happened within the churches. Our governments had official policies of debunking the UFO and ET contact phenomena for best part of 70 years. We have been culturally habituated to laughing at people who describe close encounters or abduction experiences, and it's only really in the last 3 years that that policy has changed in the US, with the Pentagon finally coming forward and authenticating the UFO phenomenon, and that led last year to the Senate briefings. So I hope there's a bit of a culture shift happening right now. Certainly we're hearing from authorities on the subject of contemporary ET contact in a way that we never have before in my lifetime.
All right, I just want to make a statement. I recently tried to contact Avi Loeb because I showed you Amaru Maru, which is something he thought might be an alien spacecraft. Well, it's a finger from a god or from some giant creature in space. It looks like a human finger. I mean, it is basically. I'm sure it's humanish. And I have so much stuff. I have giant body parts here from a 3-foot long fingertip. It's been DNA tested. It's got the fingerprints on a fingernail, everything. So how deep can the mind go? How much is it allowed to be spoken of? Can because I've been saying this stuff for 7 years. 7 years at least. Very, very loudly on the internet, and I'm getting nowhere. And even guys like Paul Wallace, I'm not sure he wants to engage either. You know, people just have an aversion to being, like he said, it splits your, people. But I have the evidence. It's not like I'm just making up, let's go talk about it, let's discuss it. Well, I want to discuss it, but I want to discuss the evidence. Where does the evidence actually lead, and what does it point to for our eternity? Because that's what I'm concerned about right now, is eternity. As far as I'm concerned, this part is done. The only thing I have to do now is learn how to get by after I stop taking this last bit of oxygen. Now, this is an hour and 17 minutes long. We're only into 8 minutes. I can't help myself. There's so much to talk about. And when I get on the topic, I have a lot of evidence to present. So it's going to take some time. I'll probably have to do this in a bunch of different segments. But this is phase 2. Let's just go back at it for another few minutes and see where we lead to. And I'll find a good place to cut it off. And then we'll come back at it. Because if you can't get to the level where I am, showing these dragons and things I'm showing that are just spectacularly large, things in space are body parts, moons are body parts, all the ancient Greek stories appear to have a good foundation. Now, let's look a little deeper, is my way of thinking. Let's see how this plays out. Okay, here we go back again, Paul Wallace.
So we have people like Haim Eshed, the former chief of space security for Israel. He was the brigadier general, held that position for 27 years. He can come forward, as he did a couple of Christmases ago, and say that on the basis of his work, his belief is that we are already in contact with a number of spacefaring civilizations who make up what he called an intergalactic federation. And we've been in contact for some time, but they've chosen not to self-disclose until we have a better understanding of space. Now, in years past, you would never hear anything like that from someone in authority like him, and nobody above him came in and debunked him. And he's just one example. We've heard from Alain Juillet, the French security chief, who has authenticated the work of ATIP as investigating metamaterials retrieved from UFO crashes. And so he has endorsed what Luis Elizondo has said, who headed up that unit within the Pentagon for 10 years. All this is coming out. The Pentagon has authenticated the footage we've all seen of the Tic Tac encounters from 2004. The USS Nimitz engaged to follow these incredible, well, UFOs, to use the old-fashioned name. And look, there are other senior figures around the world speaking about these things and not being debunked, which is new. So there has been a culture shift, but there is still this bias towards ridicule when people talk about UFOs, ET contact, abduction phenomena. But I hope that with my books, we're making it more a part of mainstream conversation again, and more people are opening up to these topics. I remember as a little boy growing up in England watching a children's cartoon called Noggin the Nog, and it was stories from out of the Dark Ages, and there was a Welsh dragon in it, a Welsh griffin called Idris. And so I grew up thinking that the dragon stories were a Welsh phenomenon. And then as I've studied theology and world mythology, I've realized, of course, that dragons occur in ancestral narratives all around the world.
All right, this may be a good spot to stop. Yes, 100%. However, the sizes of these things and the details talked about Typhon and about Quetzalcoatl and all, because Quetzalcoatl is on the east coast of the United States, the plumed serpent. I've shown that very clearly too. So, how deep are we allowed to speak? These are realms that if these creatures do exist, and they obviously did at one point, if they wanted to come down here and say, hey, we're taking over, I mean, it's not a whole lot you're going to do. That's pretty scary in itself. Now, you know, when you consider all the possibilities, who knows what they're making all these weapons for? I'm telling you, you know, I don't know what to say anymore. I just don't know what to say anymore. But sometimes you say too much, you get in trouble. But, you know, all I'm doing is talking about what I'm talking about. And, you know, like you said, every culture had these dragons. And they obviously existed, so I don't know what to say about that. Whether, all I'm hoping is God Almighty is the one I'm going to find, and his son was Jesus Christ. And I can't think any other reason that somebody would do what Jesus did. You know, but I have 100% faith now. I have to have it. But I do have it because of the things I found. I can't deny the things I found. Do they have the meaning I think they have? I believe they do. And if they don't, well, there is no meaning. So what's the difference? You know, you got to always look on the bright side of the street. But if I think back through what would happen, I sent 600 guys down, 200 of them made a disaster out of the whole thing, had all kinds of monsters, did this and that. And, you know, when you talk about Gaia and Tartarus, and I can't, nothing fits together 100%. But if I'm going with the 600 watchers, 200 of them started trouble. They had battles in the heavens. The Greeks saw these kind of things going on, recorded them, and at the end of the thing, there was nothing but body parts in space. And God thought he could reset everything by a giant flood, and he did it. And it didn't reset completely, is the way I see it. And he sent his son down to say, you know, either straighten out, or the next time I come down, I'm coming back with a rod of iron, and the ones that didn't straighten out are in trouble. That's the way I'm taking it. So I've straightened out. I realize